Ruth and Boaz unite. In our last story, we were introduced to Naomi and Ruth. Naomi lost everything because of the death of her husband and 2 sons, and the only person to remain faithful to her was Ruth, her daughter-in-law. Both Ruth and Naomi ventured to Bethlehem, Naomi's hometown. There, Ruth worked the fields of a kind and noble man named Boaz. Boaz protected Ruth and showered her with favor. Now we learn of Ruth and Boaz's connection and romance, and their relationship begins a bloodline that would change the world forever, as inspired by the book of Ruth. Ruth worked the fields of Boaz for weeks, and moment by moment she pined after him. It was not his wealth or looks, but the kindness and humility he displayed to all his servants and workers. She spoke often of him to Naomi, and Naomi's heart grew excited for Ruth. She watched her sweet daughter smile as she spoke his name, and welled with excitement before she left to work the fields. As Ruth was speaking, Naomi interrupted her and said, "Ruth, you work so hard." Naomi stopped, wiping away a few tears. "It is my deepest desire for you to find rest for your heart and hands. You should go to winnow barley tonight with Boaz and the rest of his servants. Then, after he has ate and drank, you should stay the night, along with the others in his household. Uncover his feet when he sleeps. That will wake him up gracefully so you two can talk in private. I have a feeling you will know where you stand after that." Ruth did as Naomi said. She washed her hair and put on fresh clothes and departed gleefully to the threshing floor, where people were winnowing the barley. She worked and laughed alongside Boaz and the rest of the workers. Every once in a while, Ruth and Boaz would meet each other's eyes for a brief moment. The entire house ate together afterwards, and the people began to retreat to their beds to sleep. Boaz was the last to leave the dining hall. He stumbled around the candlelit room and rested his eyes on a heap of grain. Ruth watched from a distance as Boaz fell into a deep sleep. She gracefully walked over to the foot of where Boaz lay. Slowly and with great care she uncovered the blanket from Boaz's feet. The slight breeze came in from the window and tickled his toes. Boaz opened his eyes and sat up immediately. All Boaz could see was a dark figure laying at his feet. Ready to draw his sword, he said, "Who are you?" "I am your servant Ruth," she whispered. "Please spread your wings over me as a redeemer." Her heart was beating fast, and her hands sweat slightly out of nervousness. Boaz was known as a kinsman redeemer. In those days, kinsmen redeemers could marry a widow in place of a deceased relative in order to take care of her. Ruth was truly asking if Boaz would want to marry her. Ruth could barely see Boaz's smile in the dim candlelight. He sat up more and leaned over towards her and said, "In all your time here, you have not chased after all the young men here, whether poor or rich. Instead, you have remained here with me, worked, and been pleasant company. Do not fear, and take heart, because everybody knows you are a worthy and beautiful woman." It could not be seen in the night, but Ruth was blushing. Boaz took her hand and said, "I am not the only redeemer here in Bethlehem. There is another that lives closer to you than I. Tomorrow morning I will speak with him. If he does not wish to redeem you, it would be my absolute pleasure." The two of them smiled at each other, with only a dim candle and the crescent moon shining on their faces. Ruth lay there at his feet until morning. Boaz sent her off with more barley for her and Naomi, and then Ruth left early so nobody would see her, lest Boaz lose his honor. Ruth rushed home to bring back good reports to Naomi. The two women laughed and cried with one another. Naomi took Ruth by the cheeks and said, "Trust me, the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." And sure enough, Boaz rushed in the morning to meet with the other redeemer. Boaz sat at the gate of the other redeemer, waiting for him to come out to meet him. He thought of Ruth while he waited and watched the sunrise. She was beautiful, humble, and kind enough to take care of her mother-in-law when she didn't have to. He sat and daydreamed, looking blankly in the horizon. The other redeemer walked from his home to the gate and sat beside Boaz. There Boaz spoke of Ruth and Naomi, and asked if the man would want to redeem her for himself. The man was willing to redeem Naomi and her property, but unwilling to marry her or Ruth. lest he muddy his own family inheritance. Therefore, Boaz was given permission to marry Ruth and redeem her. Boaz did his best to remain composed and hide his excitement. "Very well, I shall redeem her," Boaz said. The two men laughed, and Boaz and Ruth began to make arrangements for their wedding. The time had come, and all of Bethlehem was there to witness the union of Ruth and her Redeemer Boaz. Boaz watched as his bride Ruth approached the altar. She was beautiful, despite her brokenness. Ruth looked at her Redeemer and groom Boaz. He was strong yet gentle, and worthy of her devotion. The two of them were married and experienced the bliss and unity of marriage. Together they conceived a child and named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David, Israel's king. Boaz and Ruth's marriage was but a thread in the greater tapestry of God's marvelous plan. One day there would be another wedding of sorts. The imperfect and broken bride would stand before her strong and gentle Redeemer. A beautiful picture that reflected a greater truth was unfolding. A picture of God's love and redemption for his people, and their loving devotion to him in return.